Hello everyone. It's been a minute. I hope that you're all been really well. I've purposefully been staying out of any kind of connection, just to let the environment take control. Listening to what nature has to say. Finding ourselves in bus life, snacking, taking notes, and being a part of a different world, so to speak. But there are times when you just sort of have to let things settle. You end up witnessing, as some people follow, that the mainstream media aspects are starting to talk about what has been spoken about for a little while, longer than now. So it's gotten me to a point of like almost a proper confusion, where you wonder what is actually going to happen next. I'm not talking about certain maybe distractions or hyperbole and fear, but more in a sense of what is the outcomes of the actions of what's been a very economic point of time. And I love economics in this regard. It's I think the reason why I love it, and I've always loved it, is I've recognised that it's just not sustainable, and that's been for a very long time. And the idea behind looking at the instability of it makes you then start to see the holes in it. And today I'd like to just discuss some of the ideas that I seem to think might be a little bit holy. So religious or not, don't shoot the messenger. I just want to go through a couple of topics that we'll find ourselves skirting, you might say. Bubbles. Personally, I prefer ones that are more skank related, with a dub connotation. Keys, organs, that sort of thing. But in this one, we've got bubbles of attraction. So, and that's been in relation to stimulus as an inspiration, but then forced time outside of certain economic negotiations that we evolve ourselves in and work so hard for. So we've got we've got a lot of bubbles going on, and when I speak, I'm talking on more of a global scale, and I hardly even look at Australia. And while I recognise what we think Australia might get off easier in relation to it, and we could go back to the GFC and how we think that Australia got off easy to it, but I'd like to sort of clear up some of the ways that I see it later on. Obviously, stimulus is a massive one. I think 46% of the US economy, cash economy, was put into stimulus, which ultimately you would think that in terms of the cash economy in relation to inflation, that would basically put inflation to 46%. So what we want to take a look at is in relation to flation. Okay, so we talk about inflation a lot, and deflation gets thrown around from time to time, and then you got stagflation, and the outcomes of them are significantly different, and that's all created by the flow of money and the velocity of money. So we got rates. They've been a big one in discussion, and the rates on bonds that are predominantly creating junk bonds at the moment to create funds, and then of course there's the consequence of taxation in relation to rates of taxation. So we've got rates of central banks, we've got rates that countries are paying, We've got debts that countries are paying, debts in relation to public debt, which is government debt on all levels. And then we have debts in relation to household debt, private debt. So rates, we've got rates for countries, okay, which are what's being spoken about. Because the rates for banks are what they pay to borrow, but then they'll choose their own lending. And where the Commonwealth Bank, until its sale back in the 80s, was a gauge for rate comparison, holding the rates for the community, that doesn't exist anymore. So we're already starting to see fixed rates extending out. We see a lot of economic movement, and it's very intricate on a mass scale. And if certain factors, and the fundamental key factors of the money and what it's actually doing, if they're not pursuing velocity creation of money, whereas my dollar that I spend gets spent by another person and another and another, and maybe the velocity of that $1 is 5 or 12. So we see what power there is in terms of the economic stability. If 1 or 2 drop out when we've got 12 cycles within that $1, it doesn't matter so much. But if 1 or 2 drop out when we've got 3 or 4 cycles in that dollar, then we get stagflation. So there are circumstances that we want to be able to discuss. So debt is a big one. The velocity of money, stimulus dynamics, how the spending is in relation to it, say infrastructure dynamics, they take ages to pull off. Often, from a basis of 2020 vision, we've already got the problem. And so, like say building new roads, you're going to be slowing down the roads constantly in the process of trying to build them faster. And it'll take you 10 years of slowed down road systems and high expenses in relation to all aspects of it, with a very small percentage of the population actually benefiting from that heavy machinery as it is. So money. Money is a thing. Money's been many things throughout history, and what we do is take a look at history and see where it's going to repeat itself. So what's going on with fiat currencies? Why are they fiat? Well, we should all know that by now. And why is China buying a shitload of gold to maybe take the Chinese yuan to a gold-backed currency, which would give it the strongest reliance. Now, look, economically, no one's got more gold than America, but when we start to see who actually owns the gold that is stored where, and who's going to get access to it, just like your ETFs, for those, buy shares in gold stocks that are stocks of somebody else's that really shouldn't have shares sold in them in the first place. But see, this is leverage. Leverage is a bastard because it makes people go, I can get rich quick, and then greed goes off the hook. Some money. Pink Floyd writes songs about this thing we all should pay attention to. So then money, we've got the idea of, okay, what's even happening and where do we normally get it from? Well, hours of our life, and other people call that jobs or wages. So then we take a look at what they start saying in relation to unemployment and what we're going to go through. So unemployment, all right, underemployment, okay, it's like the measure of inflation. They're choosing things that are big purchases at times, not necessarily consistent. So we're talking about a mix of somewhat irrelevant assets and which really become your liabilities. They own you, and you become a little bit more challenged in how that's all going to pay itself out. So we got a little bit to talk about, and we're only 10 minutes in. So if you've gotten this far, well done. Now we're going to get straight in. Bubbles, different times, different places, different reasons for triggers. So back in the GFC, I saw housing bubbles going on a couple of years beforehand. I see the issues in relation to mortgage rates. I see in relation to the amount of stressed borrowers. I see the relationship to the, again, numbers of people buying their multiple home as opposed to those purchasing their first or early second or something. So we've got some different dynamics in relation to markets. Stimulus come around because of a thing called, well, we all know the name of it. It pretty much gave us a year off everything except, mining and stuff like that to make an economy look good, but it's actually not going to the people. So, an economic reality is that, if you've got a lot of homeless people, you've got a really bad economy. And there are many situations in Western worlds where there's a very big homeless issue. And it's occurring. So back in 2006, there was more homeless people than mortgages that had been seized by the bank. There were more vacant homes than homeless people, and yet instead, let's round these people up and start putting them into camps and other locations. And so, we start to see the problem here. We've got benefits at the moment in Australia where you can save in the process of selling your home. If you're thinking of selling your property, you can save more, or almost more, than what you'd earn in an entire year for a rent. So you can choose to, if you think about keeping your property vacant, because basically if you've got a vacant property that's not tenanted and people can move in straight away, you can charge an extra like 4% or something like that. So add that up and then take a look at the rental aspect of a year and say, all right, well, and so we've got now people that are keeping their properties off because obviously we're in a bubble which is probably twice as bad as what America was, that sent its housing market into a crisis. Now, there was a series of bad loans being sold constantly through a couple of major firms on Wall Street during that time, but it was surrounded in the housing industry. All of a sudden you get an offload of everyone with their 6th or 7th property. It's getting rid of 3 or 4 of them. Supply and demand comes in, there we have problems. Apply that to anything. Take a look at where the stock market's gone. I mean, stimulus is ridiculous and we're all locked up at the time, so what are people going to do? Oh, we're going to play video games like apps like Robinhood and certain platforms will promote, in a sense, and in hindsight they've been acknowledging it. So let's jump on in and let's suck people's money into the stimulus market. Well, okay, so stimulus goes into the share market and the crypto markets. Now, those circumstances aren't necessarily providing something at the moment, so those companies now have a greater value, significantly, like 8x or whatever. Some of these, it's just a bit of a joke, but they're not producing 8x, and that money is not being translated in any way. So basically it just goes over and it just stays there, and then we're done. And then it's up to them to decide what they're going to do with it. But you take a look at their earnings compared to their values, and you start seeing how their earnings are so much to be desired to catch up. Or essentially their earnings are so low, making their property realistically be more worthless. Now that's frightening for people. So then, again, what happens with the bubble? same thing. Prices are a little bit inflated, overly so in many cases, to get to this point. And we've never really figured out what was going to resolve the economic stagflation, basically, because they couldn't even reach 2%. Not for a very long time. There's been printing more and more money in relation to trying to hope that they can do it. But you know what? There is so much debt that people are just like working to pay for debt. Now, nations used to have like maybe 30%. Australia had about 30% debt to its GDP back before the GFC. Greece had like 180. Japan had like 120. States ended up having about 100, but they started off at about 80. Or maybe they went to about 110, and it just went on through all the nations. And they were, the banks were broke beforehand. Everyone's been broke. So that's why it's just, I'm just going to keep printing more money. We got out. So rates, a lot of debt. So what's going to happen to rates? Well, we've just seen tax rates on a global scale are going to have to go up if a government's going to be earning any income out of what they've just spent to be able to pay off the debts. If they can't pay off the debts, then the interest rates go up. And if interest rates go up, then they have more debt. Now, if interest rates went up for them from, say, what they got was 0% interest rates from whatever Federal Reserve to whatever Western G7 nation, the ones we're talking about, the culprits, the economic culprits, where a shift is obviously an essential aspect in negotiating what comes next. So yeah, we end up seeing a mix in terms of how economies get sucked into a thing. Housing markets, stock markets, crypto markets, the value of things. Okay, so inflation, deflation, stagflation. We would think that with the 40% increase, say, in Australia, not sure what the increase to M1 has been. I think we're probably going to just be guessing, so I'm going to go off the states at the moment. So over, let's say, 46% of their entire cash money supply they sunk into the economy so far, and they've still got another 20% to add to that. So if all of that money was in the hands of society, and that society was operating and not outside of a lockdown, which wasn't ever predicted, so don't think it was to the date or anything, that amount of income free to be spending would create a significant increase to the economy and put, obviously, inflation into the hands of around the percentage of itself, so 40% or more. Now, economic systems take series of quarters to unravel. You don't just put a whole bunch of money in and then all of a sudden you've got a ton of inflation and your value of your dollar is worth less because you have to pay more to get everything, because you've put all this money in and there's now all this extra money around, but we're not creating enough out of it. So that's a bit of a concern. Then we end up with a situation that wasn't it. This money went into stock markets, it went into housing markets. The people that have tons of money, the billionaires that became more billionaires, and they're not going out and engaging in the real world. Just so we know, that's not what they do. So they spend their money in different ways, and it doesn't reach you or me. Now, we end up in a situation where we've got a lot of money, but no one's actually either allowed to buy anything or really capable of buying anything, or is putting a lot of money that is being given into paying off debts which have already been sucking money out of the economy because they've already done the injection and now it's payback time. So if that injection is not actually creating, then we're losing money. We end up having defaults. We end up having many. And it's a bit of an interesting thing for new people into markets at the moment. So basically, if you're new into any market, housing, any debt, it would be smart to hop out now. And yeah, get at me if you want more about that. So stagflation is basically what's been occurring because they've been trying to pump the inflation rate up to 2% for the last 12 years. And it's not worked, and it's not working, and they've had to try and take a look at what they can do to generate greater income. So inflation means that more activity is happening in your economy, okay, and it's like creating a cycle of growth, and that growth is in wealth and consumption. Okay, so deflation is when you've got a lot of money in your economy, but the economy is not actually operating, and people aren't confident about going out and buying. So demand is down, and so prices come down because supply and demand rules. So just basic rules here are what fundamentals can't ignore. So you can get all the FOMO you like, and it won't be sustainable. So you get hypes, but they are their own concerns. So what do we think the situation's going to be? Well, in a certain circumstance of inflation, deflation, or stagflation, we have less momentum of money in the global economy. So we are going to start seeing obviously rises of many prices that are not considered in the inflationary aspect, and many prices that will create inflation in every aspect. Building supplies for one. When I was commenting to some of the powers that be back in the late 90s about the price of diesel going up, and I mentioned that it was a smart move to be able to increase the price of something that had historically been 20 cents cheaper than petrol to be 10 to 20 cents more expensive than petrol. It increased the price of everything. So greater taxation, first of all, for the government. So that was excellent. But then when the GST came in, and obviously sales taxes and things beforehand, the increase of every step along the way, and the transportation of every step along the way, and the increase of that, and then onto the consumer, and then the final goods, and they are creating a GST trail that is, if you could say, increased by 10% repeatedly. It's almost put the price of everything up about 50 to 60% naturally. So we start to see what the cycle of money and the intention where that actually goes. So are the debts going to the consumer? This is where we look. So what's going to be happening? Well, things are inflating. Things are also deflating. Clothing, shoes, things like that, non-necessary items are deflating. What's going to happen in relation to necessary items? They're going to be inflating. That's how the cycle propels itself into the greatest good for those that are gaining from it, and the bigger issues that people have surrounded by it. So, um, we're going to end up looking at rates because that's a big one. Now, every word that's been said by a Federal Reserve or a Reserve Bank or any central bank system or World Bank or has been in relation to they don't expect. When we listen to the wording, and you can also hear that just beforehand, but when you listen to the wording and you hear the we don't expect inflation to maintain. But what do they have? Tools available. Now they never mention those tools, and when they're asked, of course, then it's put up interest rates. Okay, so high debts and higher interest rates are not going to be a great outcome for the consumer or the debted. So again, if you're early and you've got a big mortgage ahead on a property that probably won't even survive the life of the mortgage, some modern homes are so renowned, we end up looking at a situation that may be good to pay attention to. Local banks, depending, no matter what, they are aware that rates have to go up. Now, give me a mortgage on a property that was worth $70,000 back in the 80s and let the rates go up to 15, 16, 20% kind of thing, and it's like, okay, that was bad enough. Take a look at a property that is worth $500,000 or $700,000 or whatever, $100,000, and take a look at interest rates going up to 3, 4, 5, 6% from the Federal Reserve, and therefore basically doubling that for 6, 8, 12%. And start calculating that, because it's a cycle, and economies have them, what life has them. So there's a difference between what a government is going to create in terms of the need to pay rates back, and their rating. Well, in Australia, AAA rated economy, but desperate and on the verge of losing it for a while, and forced to have a surplus budget just to be able to pay something back, otherwise a chance of losing it and then crashing an economy. But if rates went up 4% from an RBA or Reserve Bank perspective, it could literally take 40 to 50% of the gross product of the nation to pay back just the interest. So, Great Reset, sure. On a national level, to a degree, sure. For us, in debt, not quite. So you got to press reset yourself, and this is what this is about. Debt is a bitch. It's a monster, and it's sucked everybody in. And there's so many versions of debt that are on the edge, and that's why they don't give away student debt. And that's going to destroy the future of any professional being able to live or exist in the United States, and we've got a whole another issue in relation to that. So we've got to pay attention. Underemployment, unemployment, they're very different things, and we need to look at the rates of them. If you're not making enough employment, you're not selling your hours for money, you can't pay for what you got, things have to be sold or other things go on. There's consequences, and it's happening already. Money needs a reset, no doubt. Cryptocurrencies are a thing. Careful for many reasons. Looking at the dynamics of how governments are going to spend this money, and how we are spending it, and savings are higher than ever, which is great in a relationship to what we've got, but if an economy makes everything more of an issue because we've saved it, because we've saved the money rather than putting the money into it to keep it actually going around, then we have a concern, and that has to be addressed. For there's no good in being the richest guy in some cemetery. William S. Burroughs. Yeah. So unforeseeable, just like the weather. Extreme, just like pandemics. It's an interesting time, and there's a lot to be said. I just touched most of this stuff because my battery's about to run flat. It's half an hour of your time anyway, so we'll dig in deeper. But look into it. Don't listen to me. It's all reverse psychology. Everything I said is the opposite. Just so you know. Bless up.